Good Sunday afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for a special edition of the Christian Recorder Dialogues. We will be sharing with you today in a few moments the documentary Spirit of African Methodism, and with us today we have the executive producer, Bishop McKenzie, who is also chair of the Publications Commission, which means she's my boss, and Reverend Dr. Mark Tyler, who is the pastor of Mother Bethel and the producer of this film. So before we get into the documentary, I wanted us to talk a little bit about the Anvil overall and the moment that we're in right now and why we're bringing back this production to share about this important piece of our church history. So Bishop or Dr. Tyler, y'all can go ahead and begin.
Well, thank you. Thank you, John. Just awesome for the opportunity to be able to share this work. Stories are important, and our stories are important, and often our stories are not being told, and we're not the ones telling our stories. And so in 2004, it seemed like it was right after the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. I wanted to learn and know the stories of the people, of the survivors. And so as a project of the Council of Bishops, the Anvil was born. It was born because the church needed to hear in a collective way the voices of their Episcopal leaders on a variety of subjects that sets the stage and sets the theme that the denomination can move under. And so the Anvil, the annual resource guide of the Council of Bishops, was born. And then as we journeyed, that's in 2005. So as we journeyed day to day, year to that, with the revenue of the Anvil going to support Episcopal district projects to the tune today now of $130,000, we are now in the process of preparing for the next documentary. So it was not enough just to read the words. We needed to see the words. Our stories are important. And unless we tell them, they may not be told, and they may die. They may die with the eldest among us. And so just as a griot would share stories from child to child and generation to generation, we must take up the mantle to share the stories of African Methodism. And so the Spirit of African Methodism was born. And we have fabulously talented people in the AME Church who are writers, who are producers, who are editors, all of that in a bag of chips. And Mark Kelly Tyler is one of them, who is the producer of the three documentaries that we've done and a documentary of his own. So I'm going to let Mark tell you a little bit about working through the Spirit of African Methodism before we have an opportunity to see it.
Well, thank you, first of all, Bishop McKenzie. And I'm telling you, I'm forever indebted to you for bringing me into this project and allowing me to use some of the gifts that the Lord has allowed me to develop while being the pastor of Mother Bethel. And thank you, John Thomas, as well, for utilizing this very important platform of yours. And great to see so many people who are logging into Facebook Live right now, about over 100 people now. So if you all hit the share button, we can double that number as well to bring people in to see this. So I kind of came along in the story about 4 or 5 years after that. I was appointed in 2008 in Philadelphia. And right away, we started thinking about the need to have a Richard Allen documentary. The late Walter Lomax, who was a local African-American physician who had become a multimillionaire and one of the leading philanthropists in the city of Philadelphia, had relatives at Mother Bethel. In fact, when he died, he was not a member, he was a Quaker, but I did his funeral for him. And so we had really become very close. And he asked me one day what I needed. And I said, well, I need some money to do a documentary. And I didn't expect him to write it, but he wrote the entire check. And by the time we finished, we needed more. And so shout out to DeBrickashaw Ferguson, who at that time was playing for the New York Jets, and his parents were members of Mother Bethel at the time, still are. And DeBrickashaw paid for the other half for the Richard Allen documentary. In the process, I thought you could just write a check to a documentary filmmaker and they would bring you back a documentary. And so what I discovered quickly is that no one can tell your story like you can. In fact, one of the people associated with that original project told me to my face that nobody wanted to hear anything about Richard Allen more than 5 minutes. They said, this is our business. We know anything more than 5 minutes is going to be boring and a waste of time. So I kindly took all of our interviews that had Dr. Dennis Dickerson and Yvonne Studevin and Catherine Dawkins, who are descendants of Richard Allen, and Richard Newman, who had just written a book on Richard Allen, and Fred Day, Pastor St. George's, and others. And I took it and I was forced to actually finish the documentary with the help of my wife, Leslie, who has TV background, my line brother, Phil Davis. We pledged Alpha together at Clark. He's an incredible musician. He wrote the score for it, and we presented it. So the documentary that many of you have seen, which is on the Mother Bethel Facebook page to this day for your use and new members class and others, the Richard Allen documentary is how I got started and walked right into this with Bishop McKenzie. I don't know which one is my favorite project. I love all of them. I'm looking forward to talking about this one when it's finished, and especially to share with you the very special moment of how Reverend Clementa Pinckney became a part of this project.
Mark, just thank you so much. We're excited about these documentaries. In fact, as we were waiting to begin our program tonight, we were testing a clip, and I said, I just want to cry. I just want to. Because when a vision becomes a reality, God's in the midst of it. And certainly God was in the midst of presenting these documentaries, not just to AMEs, but to the world. So while we're preparing to see the documentary, put some hearts in the chat, share it with some friends, take a selfie and say, hey, I'm watching the documentary. Where are you? Are you something? So that others can hear and see this message. We do not want our history to be lost. It's not that we don't, we learn from our history, we share our history, and in the 21st century, the way we share it is in a visual manner. We are visual learners, and it's exciting. So there are ways in which you can help the next one. In fact, we have a new documentary that is coming up in July 2021. In 2021, it's called AME Next, and we began filming AME Next around 2019, 2020. Well, there are over 80 interviews now with bishops and general officers, with lay members, with YPDers, with missionaries, and people all over our global continent talking about what we want to do next, where we can go next. And so this is exciting to be able to hear from all corners of the church about our next level of serving, our next level of mission work, our next level of ministry, especially in this COVID season, is where we're going to be post-COVID and when post-COVID. And so there'll be many ways in which you can co-partner with us. You can co-create with us by undergirding. Mark just said it. In order for that very first documentary that he did, it took a lot of people who believed in the vision. And so in order for us to continue to do documentaries, to continue to tell our story, to be sure our stories are not lost, that those in the past are able to speak in the present, and those in the present will be motivated to do even more in the future. You can participate by giving. You can give directly to the Anvil Resource Guide and Cash App. You can mail a check payable to the Anvil, and the address is right there on your screen. Or you can go to Givelify. Look up the 10th Episcopal District. If you click on that, there's an envelope that says Anvil, Anvil, Anvil. And please do that. And we'll talk about later on how you can get previous copies of the Anvil. But now it's time for us to get right into seeing the documentary. Now, let me back up. Did you share this with someone else? Did you text someone and tell them to come on? Did you tell them we're getting ready to go back in time and seeing the resilient, prophetic passion of the African Methodist Episcopal Church? Come on, let's watch together.
Oh, Bishop, one other thing. We're going to be back doing Echoes of the General Conference in about 3 or 4 weeks on Sunday, May 16th, the same time.
So don't forget that now. Mark your calendars right now. So if we're ready, and you really have to be ready, because the first voice you'll hear will be that of the Reverend Clementa Pinckney, the pastor of Mother Emanuel, as you know, was murdered along with 8 other people in that congregation. And before we showed that this documentary at the 2016 General Conference, we had to talk to Mrs. Pinckney to be sure, because she was in attendance. to be sure her heart was ready to hear her husband's voice and to see his picture as a part of the spirit of African Methodism. Now, if you're ready, let's see.
When I think of the AME Church, I'm reminded of the quote by Bishop Norris that says, "The AME Church is the best gift that God has given African Americans." You can see the hand of God moving all throughout our history. You know, the AME Church is about bringing people to God. It's about building community. It's about how do we get closer to God? How do we become more spiritual? However, our church and every good AME pastor knows that we are not just concentrating on getting people to heaven. We're also concentrating on their social, their psychological, all of the needs, their physical needs. And so we are to be about our Father's business, which includes looking at the holistic ministry.
One, it's in an indomitable spirit. To think we are now in our 200th, second century, and still rolling on. To think about the things, the challenges that are still there, and yet the church still meets, still gathers, still determined to meet those challenges. A favorite expression in the AME Church, you have come to worship, now leave to serve. And I think that is our spirit.
For me, the spirit of the African Methodist Episcopal Church can be captured in 2 or 3 words. The first is liberation. The second is development. And the third is definition. That we are about the liberation of the oppressed people of the African diaspora. 2, that we are for their development. Call it self-help if you wanna, but their development and participation in the world society on equal footing with everybody else. And 3rd, that we will define ourselves. We will define our issues. We will define our own goals, because whoever makes the definition has already forecast the outcome.
Well, I think what it means to me is that here we had an institution that got its origin back in 1787, before black men were really free, when people were striving for some sense of dignity. Those brave people who began the movement which became the AME Church had the courage and the integrity and the faith to step out and give leadership to what really became, I think, one of the greatest treasures of our time.
I was inspired as a boy, 8 years old, when I heard and understood the story of Richard Allen. And it gave me the energy and the drive to want to be something. I was just thinking of the nerve that it took for Richard Allen to walk out of that church. And even some of the people in there with him, his own color, would not follow him. But he walked out and stood for justice.
I've always called the AME Church a movement. Richard Allen, the founder of the AME Church, was not pursuing a religion when he founded the church. He had already found religion, not establishing a religion, but precipitating a movement. I just always refer to the AME Church as the AME movement.
What is most important is Richard Allen has engendered in us a conversation about self-initiation, self-development, self-affirmation, and how we help to make the community of faith, which we call African Methodism, have the space and opportunity to enlarge the circle of fellowship and growth for our witness and worship.
That's what made the AME Church so unique. And the genius of African Methodism is that from the least to the greatest, it has been I think, a kind of interesting melting pot, if you will, where people who have come from different backgrounds, whether you're talking about women, children, black, white, our motto itself speaks volumes.
It was the spirit of helping one another, serving the Lord. That's what he was all about.
A man who had meager resources at the time himself decided that if we put our nickels together, then we can not only help ourselves, but we can help our brothers and help our sisters to get to a point where they can help themselves and help somebody else. And I think that for me, that's the same spirit of African Methodism.
And when you talk about the spirit of AME, you can't get around Richard Allen and Sarah Allen. We have not keyed in as much as we might on Flora Allen. Even Jarena Lee comes to the fore in terms of the spirit of African Methodism. But it's also Daniel Payne, it's Henry McNeil Turner.
The African Methodist Episcopal Church is a church that was founded on the idea of self-help, because nobody will do for us what we ought to be doing for ourselves. And if Richard Allen has taught me anything, or the story of Richard Allen has taught me anything, it has taught me the sense of self-empowerment.
You have pioneering people, resilient people, strong people, passionate people, that even if a hurricane comes along and destroys your community and church, the people pop up and say, we'll build again. And that was what really impressed me about the African Methodist Episcopal Church in the face of Katrina. One interview I remember at the AME Church right in downtown New Orleans, and he said, we are the African Methodist Episcopal Church. We are the oldest denomination in America, predominantly of African American people. And we will rebuild. We're not going anywhere. And I just wanted to cry. I mean, because that is the spirit of African Methodism. No matter what, come hell or high water, we will prevail.
One of the things for me that makes us AME is that we love worship, and you can't put us in a corner. We love the breadth of worship, the styles of worship. It's best seen in our music. It's really in AME Church where you can still find great hymns being sung, along with new gospel songs and praise songs. It is something for all people, young and old, highly educated and those with minimal education. They can still find a home in African Methodism.
I think there's something to be said about the music that we sing. I still get joy out of how great the wisdom, power, and grace, how sweet the name of Jesus sounds in a believer's ear, soothes his sorrows, heals his wounds, and drives away his fears. Oh, for 1,000 tongues to sing my great Redeemer's praise.
I'm saying that we've got to be open, to be creative, innovative, to be able to meet the needs of all the people. And I think the AME Church can do that, but we've got to be open, worship, music, ministries.
I think what we're really going to have to do is look at what's really significant that makes us who we are. And in the process of trying to be relevant, trying to be contemporary, that we don't lose who we are in the conveyance of contemporary language, contemporary music, contemporary liturgy, contemporary styles of worship. Because one of the essence, I think, of who we are is our history and the soul searching, the dungeon shaking experiences that Richard Allen spoke about, that we need to continue to create environments for people to have those spiritual transformation moments where present day believers can have dungeons shook.
I think when people understand why the worship is as it is, or why we go through the Decalogue, what are the things that make us who we are, such that we're not just any other denomination? I think people appreciate that and then can move in that a little bit more comfortably. We cannot allow ourselves to believe that the things that have made us who we are and developed us as believers in Jesus Christ can be pushed aside because we want more numbers, or we want to compete with the churches that are growing that are not of our denomination.
Well, social justice is very important to AMEs because somehow or another it seems to be part of our DNA, our origination. It's our essence, and if we aren't faithful to that essence, many of the good things that we do pale in their significance if that piece is not there, front and center.
It was in 1960 at the General Conference in Los Angeles, California, that we succeeded in getting past the social action law.
We try to be intentional about our social action theme, and that's because we were rooted in a social action movement in that regard. I do think there is we have found a way of combining a kind of a radical, for lack of a better term, neo-Pentecostalism, which helps the Holy Spirit moves as he wants to move, but it enlivens the church. But I think we've had a certain genius about using that without losing the social thrust.
My great hope for African Methodism is to see it come alive again, and to see it become the community-driven force that spoke so much in civil rights, that spoke so much in social justice, that spoke so much in educational concerns, that did so much to lift the level of our participation in making life meaningful.
I just think the black church has got to challenge the powers that be on behalf of our people. And I think if we do that, it will not only make a difference in terms of the world, but it will also even in terms help the church grow. People want to know, what does this church have to offer that's going to help me and my family? That single mother trying to raise 3 children, what does the church have to offer to help me in the raising of my children? I think the church has got to be relevant, and I do not think we're relevant if we're not speaking to the issues where people live. Richard Allen is the example premier of being a prophetic voice. You know, before he started the church, it was the Free African Society. He took an interest in the lives of people, and I think the church was a natural evolvement from the Free African Society.
If you know the history of Brown Chapel AME Church in Selma and the crossing of the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, the marches, the training of the marches used to take place in Brown Chapel AME Church in Selma. And the distance from Brown Chapel to the Edmund Pettus Bridge was about a mile and a quarter, so they were really in good stride by the time they got to the bridge. The pep rallies and Andy Young and some others who were in charge of the training of marchers, and that took place in our churches. Not just in Selma, but there were a number of other churches in Alabama and in South Georgia along Highway 84 between Dothan, Alabama and Donaldsonville, Georgia, where many persons of the civil rights movement were trained.
When
things in Memphis really got bad. It was persons such as A. Jackson and Starks, Emanuel and Starks, who had relationships with Martin Luther King. Claiborne Temple was right next door to the minimum salary department, where A. Jackson had his office. It was big, so it became a rallying place for demonstrations of Martin Luther King, Jesse Jackson, Ralph Abernathy. They all met at Claiborne Temple to begin their marches.
Apartheid in South Africa now, the story hasn't really been told, but it started in the AME Church. The leaders of the ANC in the beginning were preachers of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Sister McKenzie, the niece to the founder of the African Methodist Episcopal Church in South Africa, came as a student to Wilberforce in Ohio. And that's how the connection of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. But here's the interesting fact. This lady was the founder of the ANC Women's League.
The AME Church was the only African church that provided leadership, that provided refuge for the politicians, or the freedom fighters, if you may call them. I'll give an example of the first Republican president of Zambia. Southern Rhodesia was Zimbabwe now, and then the Northern Rhodesia was Zambia. So Dr. Kenneth Kaunda, his house was just next to the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And they were coming in the church whenever the colonial masters were pursuing them, they found solace in the church.
I think that God, by God's Spirit, is determined that this is the season that we really become a global church. When you think about it, 4 years ago we went into Asia for the first time, and the church is really growing there.
The Holy Ghost, the Holy Spirit, is actively in the central part of Africa. In Brazil is another hotbed for the Holy Spirit, what he is doing there. In Asia, it's the same.
When I moved into Kenya to start the work in Kenya, there was no church in Kenya. I just called people, and we had a meeting. I introduced myself, and that I belong to the African Methodist Episcopal Church. So the first question, African Methodist Episcopal Church. And I went on to explain what it meant, that it is not only the church for the Africans, but it has got African origins. And people warmed up, got interested to know what is this African Methodist Episcopal Church. About its doctrine, about its beliefs. So we started a church in Kenya.
Being birthed out of segregation by our wonderful founder, Richard Allen, who worked and paid for his own freedom because he believed that black people, people of color, anywhere in the world could be anything they wanted to be. And I think most Africans, when they encounter the belief systems and the working and the system of African Methodism, a connection to church, that we own a piece of every church in the world, man, it gets you fired up.
What happened in Charleston, South Carolina at Mother Emanuel was absolutely horrific. It broke our hearts. It really broke our hearts. Not just our hearts, but other people all over the world.
I was devastated. I was floored out because, see, I knew Reverend Pinckney, and I also knew Dan Simmons and some of the other people because of my been in and out of Emanuel, attending the various meetings, conferences, etc.
I was just out of transplant surgery and had to find a way to deal with all that was going on there. I wondered at one time if I would be able to even attend the funeral, but my surgeon said there's no question that although you are just out of operation, he said you must go to the funeral. And you must go because you need to see the people and they need to see you. It was clearly an AME funeral. There came people from all over the country who wanted to be in charge. The Senate and the representatives showed up and were expecting prominent seating on the stage. And Bobby Rankin, who was our chief of security, he told them, he said, this is not a political event. This is an AME worship service and funeral.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
After the funeral, I joined the funeral procession to Marion County, to where Clementi's body was laid to rest. As we passed through those various communities, white folk, black folk, the smaller town, standing with American flags, the flag waving, tears flowing. I said, my God, but why did it take that tragic incident for that to happen? And then shortly thereafter, the removal of the Confederate flag, something that I knew was not going to occur in my lifetime.
It's a great honor. The church has a very proud history and has really stood for the spirit of African Americans, and I would even say the spirit of America in Charleston since 1818. A spirit of defiance and standing up for what is right and what is true. And when I say that, I mean that Morris Brown, the founder, second Bishop of Zion, believed that African Americans ought to be able to assemble and worship freely, as Richard Allen thought in Philadelphia. It's interesting that they were not aware of each other, but the same sort of fervor and spirit that Richard Allen had in Philadelphia was the same kind of spirit and fervor of Morris Brown. And maybe that's why they became such good friends over time. But Mother Emanuel, since 1818, has stood for freedom and worship for African Americans in South Carolina. And so it's an humbling privilege I have to serve as its pastor.
This is my story.
That's all I can say is wow, wow, wow. You know, I have to look for my tissue. There's tissue somewhere. I know there's tissue. There's tissue. There's tissue. Thank you, John. This is wonderful. Thank you for making sure that this can be aired to a larger audience in our digitalverse. Thank you.
So we still have a discussion, and our tech team is scrolling at the bottom of the screen. For those of y'all who were touched, as I was, by this, Bishop said at the beginning, no one can tell our stories better than we can. And there is still another documentary to be done, AME Next. So as you hear us talking today about reflecting on this whole process and these documentaries, we're scrolling information at the bottom for you to contribute to telling your story. You don't need a Harvard-educated professor to tell your story. You can tell your story yourself. We've shown we can do that. So you'll see it scrolling at the bottom, Cash App, Givelify. We'll take checks too. But my words, I'm trying to find my words out, Bishop. But so this documentary was done in 6 years, 7 years before we even heard of this, of what Henry Louis Gates was going to do. So can you both tell us about what was the decision to go for this documentary, to focus on the spirit? Walk us through, why did you pick this particular topic at that particular time?
Well, at the beginning, when when we knew that we were going to pitch the idea of a documentary to be a part of the Anvil process to our colleagues in the council, and I'm grateful to the council who and the committee members who served to bring this to light, that there would be a series of documentaries that would really try to capture portions of our story. The first was Echoes from the General Conference, which you get a chance to see next month. Echoes from the General Conference, which has extraordinary stories and extraordinary interviews that really go back to some of the highlights of the General Conference. When Martin Luther King came, Jesse Jackson came, when there was a protest against Eisenhower coming, and the whole 9 yards. A whole lot of things in that documentary, which you get to see May 6th. Is that right, John? Is that May 6th? And so a part of developing, there was a series of documentaries. The first was Echoes. The second was The Spirit of African Methodism, because we wanted to be able to show the global church and be able to amplify the vision of the AME Church, to show the pieces of self-help and social justice and outreach ministries and intergenerational ministries, to be able to see it. We're visual learners, and we read it and all of that. We got the books on the shelf, and we go to school, we study it. It's a part of curricula, but to be able to see it live and in living color. I had to prepare myself to hear Clemente Pinckney again, and I got a text from someone that said, I had to prepare myself to hear Bishop Sarah Davis again, and Bishop Young again, and Bishop Adams again. If we don't capture the moments while these moments are happening, they'll be lost. And you really don't understand the value until the years go by. And then the next documentary was the prophetic preaching. Prophetic preaching, those are sermons that have been preached by our Episcopal leaders, prophetic preaching. Preaching Under Fire. And then the next documentary, which is due to be premiered in July 2021, is AME Next. So the first three really focused on where we were, our history and our heritage, where we are, which is the spirit of African Methodism, and now we want to focus on where to go next. And so we wanted to hear from lay members and officers and pastors and non-clergy and academic, those in the academy, as well as our Episcopal leaders, let's take a look at what's next for AME Church. And so we wanted to focus on not what's wrong with the church, but what are we willing to do to push the church forward into the 3rd century. Now more than ever do we need Jesus. And we need to know how we present Jesus to younger generations without losing those who have brought the church safe thus far. In Hebrews chapter 12, the prophet says, take a look around you, there's a cloud of witnesses. And there is a cloud of witnesses, pioneers who are cheering us on. And so they want us to get our act together. And so let's take a look at what the third century looks like. What does next year look like? What does the next 5 and 10 years look like? Every organization, every corporation, every business in the world has a 5-year plan, has a 10-year plan, has a 25-year plan. And we're still at ground zero. So my prayer is that when, as we go through these interviews, like I said, we're already 80 so far. As we go through these interviews, we'll be able to take a look at what we need to do now so that we are relevant in the future, so that we are cutting edge on the future, so we're at the door at the future, so we are part of creating a better future for our constituency, not only the constituency that we have right now, but the ones that don't even know they're getting ready to be a part of our community. Yeah, our global community. So there is a lot to be done. So there was a series of documentaries that are planned. There are 2 more planned after that. You know, there are other things to do, other places to go, other stories to tell. But we wanted to be sure to capture these stories in such a way that will be a benefit to the church. Now, these stories, this documentary can be used in your new members program. It could be used in your Bible study. It could be used in Founders Day. It could be used in Sunday school. And so there's so many uses for these stories that help tell it in such a way that is easily received. So I'm excited about the council. I'm excited about our quadrennial theme committee, the original quadrennial theme committee. Because let me call my colleagues' names because they did great work. Bishop McKinley Young, Bishop C. Garnett Henning, Bishop William DeVoe, Bishop Theodore Kirkland, Bishop Adam Jefferson Richardson. Y'all give them some hearts now because they really helped us. Bishop John Hurst Adams, Bishop Frederick Hilborn Talbot, and Bishop Vinton Anderson. That was the original quadrennial theme committee. And this is the original book. I don't know if you can see it. It was called The Anvil, Living Well. And then those who serve now in the ad hoc committee is Bishop Ronnie E. Brailsford Sr. and Bishop Carolyn Tyler Guidry. And then our general officer, Reverend Teresa Fry Brown, who was the editor of the latest Anvil. This is the one that was published in 2019. And so we are preparing for AME Next. I hope you're ready. I hope you're excited. And in a minute, we're going to ask you how you can be a part of this, not only in the giving, but also in sharing your photos and sharing your videos. And that's how we're able to capture the story. I'm excited, John. I can go on for about 4 or 5 more hours.
I think you're muted, John. Somebody muted you. So, well, while John is trying to get unmuted, let me anticipate some of the questions that are coming up in the chat.
I figured it out. So I hit on a button I didn't even know was there. But Doc, I just wanted to give you your props because you've done a yeoman's work at helping Bishop McKenzie and the council's vision come to fruition. So as the producer on, I don't know how many, this is your 4th documentary now that you've done for us, or so 3rd for us and then 4th overall. Talk to us about the process. Talk to us about some of these things that you've experienced on the ground being the producer.
Yep. So first of all, like Bishop McKenzie, I couldn't watch it without just my eyes continually filling up with tears. Each of these, I mean, like literally every particular scene or every, interview that you see in there, we had to actually cut that out. So it was like a 30-minute to 1 hour interview with each bishop. And so to be able to get a 15-second snippet meant reading all the transcripts and beginning to kind of let the story emerge. I mean, we went into Spirit without any real kind of preconceived notions, other than the fact that Bishop McKenzie kind of gave me the directive, let's find out what the spirit of African Methodism is. And so as we kind of started pouring through the raw, it's like a sermon. So for those of you who out there write sermons each week, you know what I mean. You just kind of get all the raw material and you begin to look for emerging themes. And so, well, here's social justice. Let's put all of those comments here. Here's worship. Let's put all of that here. And one thing that happened, and it seems like every project has something that kind of interrupts it. we were finished. This was, I think we had everything recorded prior to what happened at Mother Emanuel. And, again, losing so many people that were so close to so many of us in the way in which it hit the AME Church, there was no way that we could finish that project and do it with honor without addressing it. It just so happened that Reverend Pinckney had delivered Reverend Gertrude Trescott, who I think was the first woman ordained an itinerant elder in South Carolina in the 7th Episcopal District back in the day. And he brought her to us because I was working on a documentary about the history of the AME Church of South Carolina that Bishop Norris had commissioned. We never finished that. All the interviews are done. We still want to finish it. So maybe we'll come back passing the hat one day for that. But Reverend Pinckney brought Reverend Trescott to the interview. And I think we were at using the office of Bishop James, retired Bishop James. And so while he was there, I said, you already have your suit on. Can we get you to talk about Mother Emanuel while you're here? And he said, sure, Mark. So everything you heard of him was totally, he was not prepared for an interview. He just sat right in that chair and just delivered that, with that amazing voice of his and talks about the history. I pray we can finish that documentary because there's so much more of that. And so we had to go back and redo and rethink the beginning and the end. And I thought it really came out strong. So here we are moving toward AME Next. Bishop McKenzie, so the first documentary, Echoes, had about 30 interviews total. We only did the bishops' voices. The Spirit had the bishops, and as you saw, other voices. So we may have interviewed 60. Right now, because we traveled to South Africa to interview people at the big connectional meeting there 2 years ago, and we've done interviews in Los Angeles and other connectional meetings, we are already at about 100 interviews, and that's pre-pandemic. So this time it's the pandemic. So we really need the resources to help us go back and then finish it, because we can't tell this story now about AME Next without talking about the ways in which the church has been deeply impacted and changed because of a global quarantine, people having virtual church. It will look so outdated to roll that out in July and not talk about that important part. And so, again, that's going to take a lot of work. I want to shout out my partner in this, Phil Katz, who is not AME, but Phil and I have been working together since the Richard Allen documentary. He is an amazing cameraman, sound guy. He does it all, the pre and post production. And so Bishop McKenzie knows that she sees Phil and I rolling with big old golf bags full of stuff. That's all the equipment. And a lot of you who are listening have been interviewed by us. But so again, I'm looking forward to AME Next, because there will be so many other voices as well. And the topics and themes are really, really important.
So let's talk about this moment when we're in. Now, we've talked about the good things of doing these documentaries. What are some of the challenges? Because, with everything that comes together, there are some challenges. What were some of the challenges in putting these together?
I think Mark was talking about all of that. You got a whole lot of moving parts, and you're trying to put it into a cohesive script. I can tell you that initially, one of the challenges is getting people to understand that this is something important. We really need to do it. And that this is a vision and it ought to be done. And yeah, we have a lot of things to do anyway. There's so much on our plate, but this is important, that these stories need to be preserved, and the voices need to be heard, needed to be heard. And so, anybody who knows me, that I like get it done people who are visionary, who can hear the Lord and be able to see, even though it hasn't materialized yet. And then Mark and Phil and Mark's wife and Annika Howard. And I just, if I start naming names, I'm going to miss somebody. They're all going to be mad and upset with me. But to be able to say, Mark, here's the vision. And we need to get it done. And it needs to be ready by this time. And the only times we have for interviews, I think at the first time it was January. It was January at a Council of Bishops retreat. This is the only time we have. And we got to get everybody in. And of course, it's like, well, how much is this going to cost? Well, we don't have no money. It's like the story of my life. We want to do this. You got any money? No. but we're trusting God that this is going to do. And so every time you purchase an Anvil, you helped getting the documentary off the ground. We didn't know how many Anvils were going to be sold, and it's in each Episcopal districts, and how many people were going to read it. And some people used it for their Bible studies and for their Sunday school class and for the new members class, be able to hear the voices and so forth. And so we were just trusting God. You talking about a hurdle. You got there's sound equipment and there's camera equipment. You got to be in the editor's room. There's time. You have to understand, how many times did you go over every interview, Mark? Was it 10 times? Was it 20? Was it 25 times?
Oh, and then so it's like you got a great sound bite but there's a little interruption. So it's like, how do we splice it and still have integrity with what we're presenting? So it's not the exact, it's not, so you had to like edit that down. But my favorite though, Bishop, is recording in an airport hotel while AMEs are outside the door doing AME stuff in the hallway. So we got a general, the mini general conference right outside of our door with people trying to remain quiet. And if that's not it, there's this huge airplane coming down over LAX. And it's like, and now we've got to say this now as well to a bishop. Excuse me, Bishop, can you do that one more time? And they're looking at me like, Negro, please. I mean, so when we had, really, you talk about the challenges, John. So it's, how do you, get bishops to leave a AME business meeting to come and do their interview that they were scheduled for? Well, you ask Bishop McKenzie to do it for you. That's what you do.
And sometimes that wasn't an easy task. And sometimes we redid interviews, because once the interview was done, sometimes it was, well, I'm not sure I like that. I want to do it again. And we did. The deal is to get the best story in a spot, in a place where it can be edited properly and so that you can see it today. But what Mark is correct. It is the people who share their stories, their ideas, and their thoughts that drive the documentary. So it's not like we went into the documentary and say, this is what we want. We want you to say this, we want you to say that. We're looking for a quote on this, that, and the other. And so then it's what we say. And sometimes what we say is not really what needs to be said. And so we went into the process of the documentary as, here's the theme. Talk to us. Say something. What do you have to say? And it was just amazing. Moment after moment, interview after interview, and it built. And by the time the genius of our camera people and the genius of our producers and the genius of the editor who put in the clips of the photographs and the historical pictures and the back side of the story, the front side of the story, it puts it into a wonderful package that everybody had an opportunity to enjoy again today.
Yeah.
Yay.
Can I just jump in real quick, Bishop McKenzie? So first of all, I just want to say that this process has been really fun over the last, I don't know how very many years we've been doing it, because, working with a visionary is exciting. So I don't mind like building the airplane as we go, because that's generally how I approach ministry. So when Bishop says to me, all right, Mark, here's the deposit. This will get you and Phil there, and it will buy you some lunch while you're there. So Phil and I, once I kind of convinced, because Phil is not as, his faith is not the same type of faith, right? In the sense of building it. Phil is like, Mark, I need to see the check. And I'm like, trust Bishop McKenzie. After the first one, he was sold. In fact, he does real estate development now. And the only projects that he works on are these, because he just loves it so much. And he's like, he'll come out of retirement just to do these projects. So, but you talk about these stories. So I'm so excited. I think it's actually the third Sunday in May. May 16th, we'll be back at 6 p.m. on the same platform. Bring folk with you. We're going to watch the very first one, Echoes from the General Conference. And I was just thinking, as I was watching so many of those bishops who are no longer with us, but Bishop Henning, it was such a great storyteller. I mean, his stories, I wish I could just do one documentary and call it like Bishop Henning stories, because the way he tells them. So I won't spoil it, but if you miss the next one, you're going to miss his story of when Dr. King showed up at the General Conference in Cincinnati in 1964 and told in only a fashion that he could, as at that time a young preacher who got the opportunity to drive him from the airport.
Don't tell no more. Don't tell no more.
Come back.
Don't tell no more. Don't tell no more. No, and
Well-
wait till they hear Bishop Hildebrand's story.
Oh, Lord. Yeah.
Woo!
We're trying to bring all in. Well, we're coming up at about an hour, and I know that this is an evening, and we thank so many people for being here. All in the chat, just let me tell you, Bishop and Dr. Tyler, that people are excited about the quality. They're excited about seeing it. They're excited about just how we look, and that this is, a stellar contribution. So kudos to both of you from all over the church and around about this. Before we go into our announcements, and of course, we're going to come back for the bishop, you'd have the final word. Any thoughts, anything that comes to your mind about just what the spirit of African Methodism means to you just in this moment?
Resilience. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you took that's my word, Bishop. Yeah.
Resilience. We keep coming back, and reconciliation. We keep coming. We are bridges over troubled waters, and then I would say liberation.
So Bishop, you mentioned.
Go ahead, Mark.
Oh, go on, Mark. Yes, Dr. Tyler.
Well, yeah, no, listen, I agree. I mean, this is so it's going to be really interesting what stories come out of the pandemic, and when we finish this last segment, and it almost seems like it almost needs to be a documentary unto itself. The AME Church in the pandemic, because there's just so many stories, but the ways in which congregations have found a way to still be the church without a building. I continue to say Mother Bethel, drawn on our history, we were a church from 1787 during the walkout from St. George's until our first building in 1794. That's 7 years without a building, but being a congregation. Richard Allen and others, almost, some of them gave their lives in the yellow fever epidemic. And again, they had no church building, but you couldn't tell them they were not a church. And so in a lot of ways, I think that this moment really resonates with where we've come from, and that we are rediscovering how important people are. And I just want to say one other thing, John, before Bishop McKenzie closes us out. People have asked where we can find the documentaries. I'm not sure, Bishop, if they're going to eventually end up in the online store at the AME Church and the Sunday School Union or not. But I would imagine that you can see this one again on the replay once this ends. But I know that's one of the things that's been talked about, where you can get these documentaries.
Yes, with the permission of the Council of Bishops, we have posted this documentary itself without the commentary to the AME Church YouTube page that is administered by the General Secretary's office. So it is already there. It was just hidden until we did this talk. So now that we have talked and we've shared with you, it will now be shared. And of course, Doc, we're waiting on you to get the preaching from the front line on the official AME Church YouTube page, and the Richard Allen documentaries, the one in English combined with, and again, I have to give Dr. Tyler's props. He made sure that it was subtitled in Spanish, Portuguese, and French. Those are all on the AME Church YouTube page, administered by the General Secretary.
Wow. Now, before you go to announcements, let me make a pitch.
That's where I was coming. Go ahead, Bishop.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Visions come with a price tag, and sure, it's easy for us to say like, "Wow, this is a great idea," but we have to pay for sound and editing and materials and all of that. And sometimes, in some places, especially when we went far, like to Africa or to the West Coast, we had to get additional sound crew and additional camera people, and we had to rent equipment that you can't carry on an airplane to go. It's too big to go, and so there's a price tag to it, and we need your help in order to finish AME Next. We really do. $25, $100, $250. Somebody can write a check for $1,000. I know you can. Somebody can write a check for $5,000. You can do that. You can give through the Cash App at Cash App $Anvil Resource Guide. You can make a check payable to the Anvil and mail it to the 10th Episcopal District, attention the Anvil, and the address is on your screen and it's scrolling on the bottom of your screen as well. And then you can go to Givelify, download the Givelify app and search for the 10th Episcopal District AME Church and use the Anvil envelope. There'll be a list of things and you want to click on that Anvil envelope and give to the Anvil. And all of your funds that you contribute today will go to completing AME Next. There is no other plan but you. And I'm believing that God will use you to contribute what you can, to be sure. And just as you saw in the credits from this documentary, you'll be able to see in the credits of those who have shared with us. So I'm just amazed at what God can do. God is just, the Lord is just extraordinary. That 3 documentaries later, the first one came in 2012. It is now 2021. That 3 documentaries later that we are here talking about completing storytelling. And so we can do it by the help of God and by your help. So pray about it. Please do so. And please do so today. I need to encourage Mark's heart and Phil's heart. We're going to do this. We're going to get this done. The Lord being our helper. So my brothers and my sisters, there's a way in which you can participate in getting our stories told. And I'm praying that you will do so today and do it in such a marvelous way that we can continue to produce quality work. After all, this is the African Methodist Episcopal Church. This is our story.
Amen. Thank you, Bishop. Let me do these announcements, then we're going to come back to you and Dr. Tyler for final words. I just want to say, if you looked at this and picked this up, then you need to support our own documentary. I did it. You need to do it too. So speaking of our dialogues, our next TCR dialogue will be on April the 29th. We'll be joined with Rick Wade from the United States Chamber of Commerce, who will be interviewed by Antoine Seawright. You can see that very important discussion here at the Christian Recorder. As we stated, the next Anvil screening will be on May 16th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. That Sunday, May 16th, after Mother's Day. Come back right here for the screening of Echoes from the General Conference, and we'll also give you an update on how we're doing with AME Next. This platform is sponsored by the Christian Recorder, and we ask you to continue to support the Christian Recorder by buying a subscription for $36 a year, and visit us on thechristianrecorder.com. You see the work we're trying to do and continue to do to share AME stories such as this. Also, we salute our publisher. Support the AME Church Publishing House for your church school of worship needs. There is some new exciting programming that will be done by our publisher in May, and so look out for an important email that will come tomorrow. And if you haven't signed up for the AME email list, do so via thechristianrecorder.com or the AME Church website. But tomorrow will be a very special announcement about new publishing house programming that you can take a look at. We also like to salute our sponsors who have enabled us to keep doing this work during the pandemic. We would like to acknowledge at this time Miller for Retirement Services 2021. That's Reverend Dr. James Miller for Retirement Services 2021. And Ms. Tabile Ngubene, Advocate Tabile Ngubene from the 19th District for Judicial Council. Thank you for your generous support and helping us to keep doing this programming. Before we go back to Dr. Tyler and Bishop McKenzie, I want us to show that giving slide one more time so you can see that and give you like 1 or 2 seconds as they get ready for the final words to take a look. And again, if you saw the PBS documentary, $25, $10, $5, anything to help us tell our story, because no one can tell our story like we can. So we'll leave that for a second. All right. Final words. Thank you to Bishop and Dr. Tyler. So we'll turn it over to you for the final words.
Well, I want to let the bishop have the last word. And, this is a screening, but this is still AME. So, so Bishop, again, thank you. And to all the bishops as well for putting up with us. Again, I know that sometimes when we ask for interviews, they were not at the best particular time, but we just know how important these stories are. And so again, when I look up there, and I think of all of those incredible voices who are now silent on this side of Jordan, that it's just so wonderful that we've been able to capture their voices. You know, Bishop Young, Bishop Adams, Bishop Davis, Bishop Grady, Bishop Henning, all of whom were part of one of those earlier projects. And so let's make sure that we are able and willing to tell our own stories. And someone asked the question in the chat, are there other projects? Now, I don't know, but I don't have a problem with doing these kind of documentaries once a year. There are tons and tons and tons of AME stories. There needs to be a Jarena Lee documentary just on Jarena Lee's amazing journeys and her ministry, an documentary on the publishing history of the AME Church, the Underground Railroad, who we don't even know what happened in the ways in which the AME Church contributed during the Great Migration. So if you can imagine the Warmth of Other Suns turned into a documentary about the AME Church role in that, one just on the civil rights movement itself. So I think that there is certainly ample room to keep doing these projects. And so, again, as long as the bishops are up for it and they keep calling me, I'm here to help. Thank you all very much. And thank you again, Bishop McKenzie.
Bishop McKenzie.
Oh, praise the Lord. Thank you, everyone, for being here on a Sunday afternoon, after dinner or before dinner. And thank you for watching the documentary. It just caught me right here just to see it again and knowing all that went into to get it to you. And so this is, there you go, the spirit of African Methodism. And thank you for watching today. And I hope that this will not be the last time that you'll share it again and again and again. Go ahead and share it with people who were not able to see it on the premiere. And the echoes from the General Conference. This is when the General Conference fit inside a church. When we fit inside of a church. That will be on May 16th. So God bless you and thank you. And thank you again, John, the Christian Recorder, our editor, for creating a platform for this to be seen. Thank you for giving us an opportunity for inviting others to come and help us do this next documentary, and then the one after that, the one after that, and the one after that, and the one after that, because we are never without stories that need to be told. And thank you to all of the team, the home team, the behind the scenes team, the people who were detail tending to make sure it gets off the ground. Yay. And so thank you for your support of our documentaries. I'm happy that is now on your radar screen. So let's make the next one. Let's make it real good. Thank you, John. And thank you to our publisher. Thank you, Dr. Roderick Thielen, and everyone who is a part of the Sunday School Union.
Thank you, Bishop. Thank you, Dr. Tyler. And we will see you all next time.